Emergency procedures are on the screen, but I'm looking around this room and I think everyone's familiar with them. I'd invite you to join with me in the karakia tīmatanga. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, ihi ake ana ti atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Apologies, I have received no apologies. We've got a full house. Conflict of interest declarations. I call on members to declare any conflicts of interest they may have in relation to this item. No conflicts. Thank you. All right, I invite Angela Gordon, Senior Policy Advisor, to speak to her report. Angela, we've all read the report, but there may well be things you want to highlight to us.
Good morning. Yes, I will report briefly on the results of the consultation on the local alcohol policy. Consultation ran from the 26th of July to the 25th of August. This policy covers alcohol licensing rules for on and off licensed venues in Lower Hutt, and we've proposed maintaining the current settings in the policy. We received 48 responses, 37 from the online survey and 11 written submissions. The public consultation covered 3 major themes: off-license caps for 6 areas in Lower Hutt, and those areas are Nainai, Stokes Valley, Taita, Avalon, Hutt Central, and Wainuiomata. The second theme was on a sinking lid for these off-licensed areas, off-license capped areas, and also the trading hours for a variety of on-license and off-license cinemas and brothels. So for the first theme, the off-license caps, there were 42 responses. We asked people if they wanted any changes to the caps, to the off-license capped areas. The vast majority of the responses indicated support for either maintenance of the off-license caps or to reduce them. And most of the reasons given for reducing the off-license capped areas were that they felt that there were too many off-licenses already, that there's a need to reduce alcohol-related harm, and there was a need to protect vulnerable communities. There were a few comments about making the off-license cap numbers population-based to equalize the license density across suburbs. And although the placement of off-licenses was not part of the public consultation, there were several comments expressing concern about the proximity of off-licenses to areas of high socioeconomic deprivation, near sensitive sites such as schools, places of worship and community facilities, and sites of cultural significance. The next theme was the sinking lid for off-license capped areas, and there were 48 responses to this question. Just over 2/3 of the respondents either agreed or strongly agreed with the implementation of a sinking lid in off-license capped areas. All suburbs that currently have an off-license cap receive some level of support for the sinking lid policy. A wide variety of reasons for non-support of a sinking lid were offered, including a recognition of our growing population, a belief that a sinking lid doesn't allow for competitive pricing, and that we should be making caps population-based to reduce the license density. Expressions of support for the sinking lid include views that there are too many already in some suburbs, alcohol density can be addressed by a sinking lid, and that all areas in Lower Hutt should have a sinking lid. The third theme in the public consultation was the trading hours. And respondents were asked to respond to trading hours on a variety of on-licenses, off-licenses, cinemas, and brothels. The vast majority of respondents either agreed to maintain the current trading hours for all venue types, followed by some support to shorten the hours for all venue types. There were very few respondents in favor of increasing trading hours. The majority of respondents were voting either to or they were saying that the trading hours were either starting too early or closing too late, or both. There were a few other comments that fell outside these three themes. And there were ideas on ways that we could strengthen the local alcohol policies. And these included restricting or prohibiting buy now, pay later schemes, further restricting alcohol advertising, and controlling the proximity of off licenses to certain areas and facilities. So the next steps on this, following the verbal submissions, the subcommittee will deliberate and decide on one of two options going forward. Option one, to recommend to council to adopt the draft local alcohol policy, maintaining the current settings, or two, recommending changes to the policy, which may require an additional public consultation depending on the significance of the proposed changes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Councillors, any questions of Angela? Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, firstly, thank you for the report. Do officers have any recommended changes, having read the submissions themselves?
I have not come up with any personal views on this.
Thank you. It's mentioned in the consultation section that council met with Richard Tione, a representative for Mana Whenua, but I couldn't see any written submission from Richard. Was there any outcome from that particular meeting?
We didn't receive a written submission from him in the end.
And my final question from the paper was about the opinion of General Distributors Limited that our council was failing to meet its statutory consultative obligations. I don't know if this is a question for you, Brad, but do we share that view?
There's an argument to be had, I think, is the answer. So the Act tells you how you have to bring a local alcohol policy into force, and there's quite a few steps that you have to go through. You have to produce a draft and consult on it using the special consultative procedure. And then it also tells you if you want to amend a LAP at any time, you basically have to go through that same process. When you get down to the bottom of the sections on local alcohol policies, it tells you that every 6 years you have to review your policy using the special consultative procedure. So the argument that's been raised by one of the supermarkets is that you first have to review your policy using the special consultative procedure, but if you then want to make an amendment following that review, you have to go through all those steps you have to go through to produce a LAP, which includes producing a draft of your proposed amendments and going out and using the special consultative procedure on that draft. So to my, whether that was the intention when the people drafted it, I would think probably not, because it's quite an overly rigorous process, but you know, it's definitely something to turn your mind to. I don't think there's been any case law on it that I could find. So we'd have to make a decision, I guess, at the point, at a certain point, if we wanted to amend the LAP following this review, whether we were comfortable that the process we'd been through here was enough to allow us to amend it on the back of this, or whether we'd have to produce a draft of those amendments and go out through another special consultative procedure. And I don't know that there's a definitive answer to that. There's two different approaches, and you could argue either way.
But Brad, if it is a decision to make changes, and I heard Angela say, depending on how substantial they are, we are going out again. We are going out.
Is that a question?
Yep.
Well, I think you could, and that would be the belts and braces approach. When I first envisaged this process, I didn't imagine you would go out again. You're reviewing using the special consultative procedure, and you're getting submissions, you're hearing them, there's a bit of natural justice process, and then I thought you could make changes on the back of that process, and that would be fine. The lawyer for the supermarkets put in a pretty good argument to say that natural justice requires you to go through the full process again. So he's arguing, or he or she is arguing, that you would go out again. It's something the council would have to turn its mind to and decide what it thought the most appropriate process was.
Sorry to labour the point, but on page 12 of Angela's report, it tells us that if we propose changes to the draft LAP, an additional special consultative procedure is required.
That's one of two views. It's not necessarily the view that I that I support, but it's certainly the view of the supermarkets that you would have to do that. So yeah, something to consider at the end, I think.
I guess, yeah. Let's see if we can then ponder that question if indeed we do make changes. Councillor Mitchell.
Sorry, just for a bit more clarity, Brad, the law has been changed in recent years so the LAP can't be appealed, right?
That's correct.
So any kind of legal challenge would be something other than an appeal of the LAP?
That's correct. It would likely be some sort of judicial review, which, could very well happen. I wouldn't rule that out. I mean, my other thought was when they were streamlining this and making it less cumbersome and less open to appeal, I think if Parliament had envisaged that you had to go through 2 lots of special consultative procedure to review and amend your LAP, that they probably would have streamlined that as well. But I doubt that was on their radar.
Councillor Dyer.
Yeah, I've got one question on the similar topic. You mentioned that an extra round of consultation may be required depending on what changes are proposed. Is there any sort of, I guess if you say there's no case law that you even need to do that second round of consultation, there's probably not case law in terms of how far you could push things if we just move things by 1 hour here or 1 hour there. Is that going to be too much that we have to go back out? Or?
Through you, Chair, I think legally you would decide whether you thought you needed to go out with the changes or not. I think if you're thinking about it from a risk perspective, there's probably less risk someone will challenge you if it's a very minor change. If it's a big change that affects a party, then you're more likely to get a judicial review of your process. That's not to say which process is the right or wrong process, just that legally there's probably not a threshold for when you make a change, whether you've got to consult. You either have to decide whether you think you need to consult or not if you're going to change it, if that makes sense.
Any further questions? I've got one just for clarity, so I'm dead certain about these sorts of things. Some of the submissions talked about things like, I've never even heard of this, but buy now, pay later alcohol schemes, putting a clamp or putting a restriction on the unit price alcohol can be sold for. I imagine those 2 things are not something that we can deal with. But there's also been talk about matters to do with advertising signs on the outside of outlets and things like that. And that is a discretionary condition that can be set by the DLC when we hear licence applications. So my question is, can an LAP instruct the DLC that you will, when there's a licence, an off-licence application, have X and Y restrictions to do with signs and cameras outside and some of those other discretionary conditions? Can an LAP stipulate things like that?
Chair, there are certain things that it can do. So Section 77 of the Act tells you that a LAP may have policies on any or all of the following matters and no others. So it restricts you to the location of licensed premises by reference to broad areas. Yes, okay, yeah, that's all you can do. One of them is the issue of licenses or licenses of a particular kind or kind subject to discretionary conditions. So I suppose that's a bit of a broad, that's probably the broadest of the matters the LAP can turn its mind to.
I guess that's what I'm asking though, Brad. I'm asking about if an LAP, if we were minded, can stipulate restrictions on signage, cameras outside built. They're some of the discretionary items that are listed 2 pages further on. An LAP can deal with those matters.
Possibly. I might have to look into the case law on that, and
Okay.
and you'd have to kind of, I think you'd have to have an evidentiary basis for why it's appropriate. You know, you'd really have to turn your mind to it. And I suppose you have to decide whether the DRC can do some of the things anyway, whether you need it in a LAP.
Okay. My other question, I don't know who's going to be able to answer it, and it could well be my poor understanding of reading graphs or something I'm missing, but I'm referring to page 26, and we've got right down the bottom some statistics for 2022-23, and it tells us how many on licenses there currently are in the city and off licenses and club licenses. But it also tells us the number of applications that were dealt with in that year. And it just seems extraordinary to me that we received 31 applications for off licenses, refused 0, but there are only 59 off licenses in the city. It implies massive turnover of licenses. Or am I reading this wrong? Am I being obtuse? No, these are not renewals. Renewals are dealt with in a separate column. They can't be. No. I suspect, as Brady is intimating, that those 31 include renewals, even though there's a separate column for renewals. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And as long as we're asking questions, we've got Tracy in the room because we're going to come to it. There were some people made comment about it being unsuitable that we have a 7 a.m. start time for on licenses. And I remember there's some debate about this. It was included so that restaurants and bars and sporting events that were in the morning, Northern Hemisphere sporting events, you know, this gave them some leeway. If we were not to have such an earlier start time, presumably they could apply for some sort of special license if they had an event like that. Remind me of.
Yes, they could apply for a special license for an event.
For an early start. Okay, thanks. That's all the questions I had. Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, just a follow-up question on that one, and it might again be a question for Brad. Some people have noted that that 7 o'clock start of licenses for on licenses outside what in the Act is variously described as permitted trading hours or default national maximum trading hours. Is there a concern that we're not compliant with the Act by having a 7 a.m. opening time for on licenses?
No, the LAP can change the default trading hours.
Right, no more questions? Okay, thank you, Angela and Tracy. Moving to the recommendations, I move that we note the public consultation on the local alcohol policy that ran from 26 July to 25 August this year. Note a complete set of submissions received via the survey and via email can be viewed at the hot link there. And note the copies of 8 written submissions from respondents who have requested to provide a verbal response can be reviewed at that site. Do I have a seconder? We're not moving forward because we haven't made those deliberations yet. You seconding, Councillor Dyer? Thank you. Is there any debate? Put that motion, which has been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Declare that carried. Right, we're now moving into the hearing of submissions, and thank you very much to those who have come along to share their views on this very important topic. Speakers will have 5 minutes each to speak to their submissions, and that time includes a little bit of space for questions that councillors are bound to have. A bell will ring at 5 minutes. In view of the importance of these matters, we'll have a little bit of leeway here, but let's see how we go. So, according to my timetable, the first person to speak is Dr. Stephen Palmer of Health New Zealand, and he's joining us by Zoom. Are you there, Dr. Palmer?
Yeah. Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome. We can hear you. Please highlight what you want to from your submission.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. Firstly, I've been medical officer health for just over 31 years for the Greater Wellington region, and in that time I've worked in the alcohol liquor licensing area. Secondly, I'd like to commend the council on the last LAP that was amended after listening to the community's concerns about the number of off licences. I just wonder, will I be able to share the screen?
There's certainly no problem with, from our end, if you're sharing the screen. I don't know technology-wise, is that possible, Vanessa? Oh, you started screen sharing and we can see it. Yep. Thank you, Stephen. Carry on.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Just I wanted to very quickly point out on page 33 of your document at the paragraph 3.3 that in that first dot point, there's no provision in the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act to consider economic activity. That's meant to be considered in your other documents like district plans and that, so it shouldn't be counted in as a balancing factor. So that was the main thing I wanted to point out there. If I go to the, I submit that alcohol-related harm is still too high in Lower Hutt, and in particular for Wainuiomata, Nainai, Taita and Stokes Valley, as shown on the graphs in the earlier pages. I suggest that the council needs to be bold and push things further. And like now that there's no provision for appeals, that means the council can safely push things further. Councillors remember that even with the amended last time, there was a projected appeal process that, although it didn't go to an ALA hearing, it took some time to work through. In terms of pushing things further, I urge the council to consider reducing the hours of off licences. This is because 85% of all alcohol purchased in New Zealand is from either a supermarket or a liquor store, and reducing the hours of off licences is probably the best way to work towards lowering the level of alcohol-related harm. So I've suggested, in our submission, we suggested 9 a.m. to 9 p.m, but even if it was brought back to 8 p.m, that would even be better. So that's the key thing that the council can do to improve or reduce the levels of harm. And doing this would not affect the desire, or I'll just bring it up, desire for the city to be safe and vibrant for people to live and play. So the second is the sinking lid policies, or the caps have worked really well, but I would strongly suggest, although the legislation doesn't provide for it yet, is setting in place a policy, a sinking lid policy for all off licences in all the capped areas. And thirdly, to extend the caps to all Lower Hutt suburbs. And I would submit that these three will make the biggest difference to alcohol-related health harm in Lower Hutt. Also support the talk about external advertising, particularly on off licences, but these are the key three that Health New Zealand would really push for. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Palmer. Councillor Mitchell has a question for you.
Thank you, Dr. Palmer. Just addressing your third bullet point there about extending caps to all Lower Hutt suburbs, what basis would you recommend for deciding on a cap for a particular suburb?
I think generally right across the Lower Hutt city, the levels of alcohol-related harm are still too high. So it's still the risk is there for all neighbourhoods and suburbs in Lower Hutt city.
Yeah, but on what basis would you determine a number for a cap for a given suburb?
Well, the Act requires starting point is what you've got there at the moment. So the council will know exactly the number of off licences in a particular suburb. That's how the caps were set 6 years ago for the suburbs that have got caps on them. You may need to have more risk evidence in terms of looking at a sinking lid policy, and I think you've got enough evidence there for particularly Wainuiomata and Nainai and Taita and possibly Stokes Valley.
Speaking about those three suburbs, yeah, the levels of harm, there's some graphs there that are disturbing, Stephen, but I did some rough arithmetic on number of outlets to population, and I don't know whether you'd agree that's any sort of basis to be doing these things. And in actual fact, Wainuiomata and Stokes Valley, to a lesser extent Nainai, had fewer off licences than the city average.
I don't think I would support sort of looking at off licences to population. It's really the geographical accessibility that is the key thing that you're trying to reduce or limit. So yeah, I think all the suburbs in Lower Hutt probably have far too many off licences for what's needed. They probably only need one or two or one probably at the most in a suburb. So I wouldn't just sort of look at things from a population ratio. I think it's accessibility that you're trying to address.
Thank you. And while we have your expertise, could you speak a little bit more about why you're in favour of earlier closing times for off licences? I mean, someone might think to themselves, well, okay, so people will do their shopping earlier. What are you achieving?
I think there's probably a little bit more discretion about the opening times, but you are looking at a key strategy that's accepted is the reduce accessibility. So you're looking at reducing accessibility both in terms of number of off licences and the hours, the trading hours. Yeah.
And my final question, because I see various figures. You said when you spoke to us that 85% of alcohol consumed in New Zealand is sold from off licences. I've seen figures of 74% and around those figures, and I'd love to nail that down. Where is your 85% figure coming from?
So back at the times of the Law Commission inquiry, that was where the 75% came from, and also the Law Commission noted that back in 1999, 55% of all alcohol was consumed in and an on licence. Since then, there's been more studies, and I can't remember, I think it was 2018 that came out, where there was a big study commissioned by the Health Promotion Agency, which looked at, I think it was electronic transactions, and certainly that's where the 85% comes from, of which half that's from supermarkets. So it's certainly increased over the last sort of 2.5 decades, and it's still increasing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Palmer. I don't think there's any more questions for you. Thank you for taking the time to present to us.
Thank you.
Now, I understand the next person on my list, AJ Pratap, is not here yet. So if we've got Andrew Galloway or Jennifer Lamb from Alcohol Health Watch with us.
Chair,
Kia ora.
could we have a page reference for each speaker, please?
Kia ora, good morning. You've got both of us. Morena, ko Andrew Galloway tōku ingoa. I'm the Executive Director of Alcohol Health Watch, and my colleague Jennifer Lamb will be familiar to you from talking to you last week about alcohol control bylaws. Alcohol Health Watch is a national organisation funded by Health New Zealand to provide credible, up-to-date evidence regarding alcohol policy and planning matters. We coordinate networks such as Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder Roku and the Cross Council Alcohol Policy Network. We commend Hutt City Council on undertaking the review of the Council's local alcohol policy and the process followed, and giving us the opportunity to make this submission. In our earlier written submission, and when we presented to the Policy and Finance Strategy Committee on the draft alcohol control bylaw, we commented on the significant burden that alcohol places on Hutt City, and in fact the whole region and nationally. Social and economic cost assessments estimate $9.1 billion annually of cost from alcohol harm. And we noted that what evidence there is likely an underestimate of the total burden of disease, particularly affecting vulnerable groups and those at greatest risk, young people, Māori, and those in high socio-economic deprivation areas. Noting that alcohol is the most harmful drug in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we know that a LAP can reduce this harm by reducing the density, location of alcohol outlets, and setting the maximum trading hours, like Stephen talked about, availability, that address accessibility, sale and consumption of alcohol. A revised local alcohol policy can and should take into account recent and relevant matters, importantly the Supreme Court decision on Auckland's provisional local alcohol policy. That from yesterday is now partially in force. The Sale and Supply of Alcohol Community Participation Amendment Act, the desirability of ensuring greater consistency and synergy with LAPs and proposed LAPs in the region and across Aotearoa, New Zealand, and it should reflect the current environment and emerging issues in the city since 2018. We think it's a lost opportunity not to revise the LAP to include other standard policies that are usually included in an LAP and provided for under the Act. Specifically, we recommend that the Council retain the cap on the numbers of off-licences in Nainai, Stokes Valley, Taita, Avalon, Hutt Central and Wainui-Mata, but also include a mandatory policy to prevent further licensed premises, particularly off-licensed bottle stores, from locating within a certain radius or distance of other licensed premises. That's under Section 77(1)(b) of the Act. We think it could include a mandatory policy to prevent licensed premises from locating within a certain radius or distance of a sensitive site, such as an educational facility, a place of worship, a marae, a health facility, or a community facility. That's Section 77(1)(c). Include trading hours for clubs and a suggested maximum hour for special licences, and that would be Section 77(1)(e) of the Act. It could reduce trading hours for on and off licences to reduce availability and associated alcohol-related harm under Section 77(1)(e). And it could include discretionary conditions, such as buy now, pay later services, alcohol advertising, adding conditions on special licences for family-focused events, and referencing crime prevention through environmental design, otherwise known as SIPT, and that can be done under Section 77(1)(f). It could include a mandatory one-way door policy for on-licensed premises under section 77(1)(g). Finally, councils have the ability to create LAPs that reflect the views and needs of the community and meet the object of the Act. With this in mind, we hope the council will take our recommendations into consideration and that they will be reflected in the revised local alcohol policy. Thank you for the opportunity to present to the committee today, and we welcome any questions.
Thank you, Andrew. Questions for councillors? Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you for your presentation. You're one of a few submitters who have noted, and we were just discussing it a bit earlier, the start of licence times for on licences, which currently we have as 7 a.m. and I think the default is 8 a.m. You're also one of a few who referred to the Supreme Court decision out of Auckland. And if I'm not mistaken, the outcome of that court process was that Auckland did land on a 7 a.m. opening time. Have I got that wrong, or are you able to speak to that particular issue?
It was negotiated, to be fair, and I think that evidencing harm between 7 to 9 a.m. is a difficult challenge for any agency. Like Stephen Palmer said from the Te Whare Ora, Health New Zealand, the equation or the strategies that can be employed are population strategies, and availability is one of the most evidence-based strategies that can be applied. So it may not be that there's market amounts of crime and disorder between 7 to 9 a.m, but cutting down that total availability will have a decrease in harm. And the evidence shows that, the international experience shows that. We can provide evidence from Auckland Council when the national default trading hours came in 2012, I believe. And in the subsequent years, the difference in harm, the improvement in harm indicators was significant. They had 24-hour trading prior. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Andrew, are you aware of other LAPs that do have restrictions? I've never heard of this thing before, buy now, pay later services. Yeah, are you aware of an LAP that sort of deals with that issue?
Oh, Jennifer.
Yes, there's a few. For example, at the moment, you could look at Waipa, that's out for consultation. They have that in there, and quite a number of other restrictions as well, or suggestions under discretionary conditions. But yes, it's becoming more and more common to put that in the LAP, and particularly when you think that you can have a buy now, pay later and rapid delivery or remote delivery, which is causing quite a bit of harm.
And I'll just add to that. While we don't have in New Zealand yet overwhelming supply of buy now, pay later alcohol, given alcohol is New Zealand's most harmful drug, I think ticking it up or putting it on credit is an extremely dangerous precedent to allow. We are giving expert evidence in a hearing in Auckland to apply that condition on a premises in Panmure. And we will really contribute to any case we can to try and keep buy now, pay later from coming into more availability through alcohol retail. It is over 20% in the United States, and I think everyone would agree we don't want to see an increase in easy credit for alcohol being New Zealand's most harmful drug.
Thank you. And when you mention adding conditions on special licences for family-focused events, what sort of thing are you talking about?
Basically that's also under a discretionary condition, that something, I don't know, school fairs or something where it's about families. I think there's been some issues with that in the past.
Councillor Dyer has a question.
Yeah, I had a similar question to Councillor Edwards around the buy now, pay later scheme. Do you know any LAPs that do restrict alcohol advertising within the LAP?
There's, so talking about alcohol advertising, again, just because it's fresh in my mind, Waipa has that in their admittedly draft LAP that's out of consultation. But yes, the other thing to note is the next review of the Auckland LAP will include a reference and align with the District Licensing Committee's practice note on advertising up here.
It's advertising external to the premises. So the Auckland District Licensing Committee put a practice note in probably about 12 months ago, which has had really great success. And in fact, most licensed premises complied very quickly, and it had an immediate impact on how much price advertising was available, was viewable. And we know from research KidsCam did, Otago University did a research project called KidsCam, which found that children they put cameras on the front of children, and Māori and Pacific children were 3 to 5 times more likely to be exposed to alcohol advertising. Much of that was at street level from alcohol sandwich boards and promotions at off licenses.
I might just add that ties into SecTed as well, to prevent full advertising on outside of the premises, which is the recommendation, not to have so much advertising on the outside of bottle shops.
All right, we appear to have run out of questions. Thank you, Andrew and Jennifer. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, thank you.
Right, the next person on my list is Hayley Horn from the Cancer Society. Welcome, Hayley. Thanks for coming in. Councillors, we're on page 51 now. We've read your submission, Hayley, but there might be things you want to highlight to us. No, there's a button on your right, on the right-hand side of that panel. There we go.
Perfect.
Thank
I think
you.
that's working. Kia ora koutou. The submission is on behalf of the Cancer Society Wellington Division. We're a registered charity focused on reducing the incidence and impact of cancer in New Zealand. We're providing comment as alcohol is a key preventable cause of cancer. Firstly, we congratulate you for reviewing your local alcohol policy. However, we have several recommendations to strengthen this policy. I will talk about a few of these due to time constraints. Firstly, restricting the number of off-licence training hours to 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., which is similar to the recommendations listed already. Next, limit the number of off-licence premises in the Hutt Valley. So there's strong evidence that decreasing the number of outlets that sell alcohol reduces alcohol-related harm. We recommend reducing the number of outlets in Wainuiomata, similarly to Stephen, as this has high numbers of alcohol outlets and large proportions of vulnerable populations. Wainuiomata also has the highest amount of alcohol-related health problems and hospitalisations in the Hutt Valley. Third, reduce the density of licensed premises by using the sinking lid policy. There are large numbers of outlets that are in close proximity in Nainai, Taita, Avalon and Stokes Valley, making alcohol easily accessible. Again, these suburbs have high rates of alcohol-related health problems and high levels of hospitalisation admissions, and reducing the number of outlets in these areas would reduce alcohol-related harm. Fourth, restrict alcohol advertising, particularly in certain areas or near certain types of facilities. We all know that industry spends millions of dollars promoting sales of alcohol. However, they often neglect the harm that alcohol can cause to health. Research shows that increased exposure to alcohol advertising at a young age increases the likelihood of drinking in adulthood. On the PowerPoint here, I've got some pictures of some advertising in the Hutt Valley. There is strong public support to reduce alcohol sponsorship and advertising, and we recommend that you extend your alcohol policy to include banning alcohol advertising near schools, marae, community facilities, and churches, implementing feedback mechanisms for communities around alcohol sponsorship, and limiting and prohibiting alcohol sponsorship and alcohol marketing, especially around council-owned and operated facilities and settings frequented by children and families. Lastly, our research suggests that people in New Zealand were generally supportive of stronger prevention policies and that there should be reduced accessibility to alcohol. We're encouraged, similarly to Stephen and Alcohol Health Watch, by the Auckland Alcohol a local alcohol plan, and we encourage Hutt City Council to be even bolder. Happy to discuss this with anyone in your policy team. Ngā mihi.
Thank you, Hayley. Councillor Dyer's got a question for you.
Kia ora, thank you for the presentation. Similar question to the one I asked the previous submitter. Do you know of any LAPs that do restrict alcohol advertising within the LAP?
No, I don't, and I'm happy to get back to you on that.
No further questions? I haven't got any questions. It was a very good presentation, and I would love to see that if you can find other LAPs that deal with those matters. It'd be great to see. Thank you very much for coming in and presenting to us.
No problem.
Appreciate it. Right, next on my list is Paul Radich from GDL, presenting to us via Zoom. Are you there, Paul? I think you're on mute still, Paul. Councillors are on page 61.
Sorry, thank you for the opportunity to speak to the committee today. Our submission is relatively simple in terms of our concerns with the LAP, but there are a number of things that have been raised this morning that are worth correcting from an industry point of view. Firstly, buy now, pay later schemes is not something that we engage in at all. They are things like Afterpay, Ping, and there's a few others around which offer 4 payments of equal amounts on any product that you buy. All this as a group is not involved with buy now, pay later schemes, and the licensing authority has already made a ruling in terms of the suitability of applicants if they engage in buy now, pay later schemes. I've heard submissions today that we have been encouraged to be bolder. Perhaps the only thing that I agree with Dr. Stephen Palmer about is that you need evidence in order to do that. And our submission is where the draft LAP has landed is what is supported by the evidence. And our concern is that when the draft LAP was released, there are a number of questions that went out with that draft LAP. Our concern primarily is that in undertaking that consultation process as part of the draft LAP, any changes to the LAP as a result of feedback answering those questions may result in there being some issues with the entire process. And we would submit that if there are significant changes going to be made to the draft LAP as a result of those questions being asked during the consultation process, that the draft LAP is amended and then reconsulted on. Other than that, as somebody who is involved in the community, we think that the Hutt LAP has struck probably the right balance, meaning that we're not happy, but we can live with it. And I'm sure that the Alcohol Health Watch and the Dr. Stephen Palmer isn't particularly happy, but it can be lived with. The final point I want to make is that the 7 a.m. time in the Auckland, you heard from Mr. Galloway that was some negotiation. That wasn't. The Alcohol Regulatory Licensing Authority made it very clear that there was no evidence to support a 9 a.m. opening time in Auckland. And in order to do that, evidence is required. I don't have anything further. Our submission is fulsome but relatively simple. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Paul. Was it the content of the question, the content of the questions that upset you? They didn't seem to me to be leading questions, or
effectively there was some questions about extending caps and whether caps needed to be included in other areas. As a business, if the draft LAP is going to change to, and I've heard some submissions this morning where the extension of caps has been suggested and changing and opening hours is suggested. As a business, when we're planning, we need to understand what the playing field we're planning in is effectively going to be. And that's what we use the draft LAP process for. If there's going to be an extension in caps to other districts and various other things, that impacts how we're planning our expansion plans, new store development, et cetera, et cetera. So that is one of the issues that we had in terms of whether the caps should be extended or whether there should be, by default, a sinking lid.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell?
Thank you. Do you have any expansion plans we should be aware of in setting this LAP now? And, you know, it comes up for review every few years. Are there any expansion plans you'd like to make us aware of? This council did lobby your company and your competitor to open a supermarket in Nainai a few years ago, but that certainly hasn't happened. So are there any plans afoot that you would like us to be aware of?
There are, Councillor. Not ones that I'm prepared to discuss in a forum like this, but I'm happy to take those offline with you. Obviously, they're commercially privileged at the moment, but certainly I can indicate that there are some expansion plans in that area.
Thank you. The other question I had, you mentioned that your supermarkets don't use those afterpay or buy now, pay later services. So I assume you have no problem if we were to introduce restrictions on those services.
No, none whatsoever. I guess the point I was trying to make is while you're being encouraged to create a range of discretionary conditions by Alcohol Health Watch, Dr. Palmer, there are two things that those, and the Court of Appeals has been really clear, there are two things that those require. One is evidence or agreement from a licensee. And I guess what I'm trying to do is say, well, the Alcohol Regulatory Licensing Authority has already ruled on a number of these things. South Waikato District Council has a live LAP that has a buy now, pay later clause in it. But discretionary clauses in LAPs are not the silver bullet that some of the health promotion agencies will have you believe. They still require evidence from those people seeking to have them imposed. But in terms of having a buy now, pay later scheme, absolutely not, no issue whatsoever.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Radich. We appear to have run out of questions. Thank you for your submission.
Thank you.
Now I can see Pete is with us. We haven't heard from Mr. Pratap. Okay, welcome, Peter Matcham. Speaking as an individual, I understand. Councillors, you're on page 59. We've read your submission, Pete, but you might want to highlight things to us.
Yeah, thank you, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. I suppose my first comment was to be would be on the last speaker, who appeared to jump straight into the standard industry response to any kind of restriction, is that we will query the process and take you to court. To me, that is a perfect example of the fact that what is being, the other submitters' points are likely to be effective, because if they are effective, they will hurt people's profits. And that is the basis of the GBH's concern, of course. Mr. Radich, I didn't intend to talk about Mr. Radich, but as he preceded me, it gives a decent lead-in. It continued to talk about the need for evidence. Well, I'm quite happy to talk about evidence. I don't go how far back you want to go, but certainly the most cited paper I could find often was from 2007, Markowitz and Grossman, the Alcohol Regulation and Domestic Violence. It established a positive relationship between alcohol consumption and acts of violence. Another one, an increase of 10% of 10 outlets per 10,000 people was associated with 34% increase in male on female partner violence. Conradi, Catano and Schaefer, 2002, Graham et al. 2010, Laslett et al. 2010, all make the same point. Laslett et al. In particular notes that alcohol is involved in 50% of all partner violence and 73% of physical partner violence based on Australian data, and the same percentage of 73% was corroborated by the research in the UK. Obviously, I didn't come along to talk about that particular point, but I'm sure your officers are quite capable of looking up the evidence as I am. There is no... What we are dealing with here is a clear conflict of interest. The council has an obligation under the Act to consider the harm to the community as well as individuals. Organisations such as Mr. Radish's represents are there to look after their members' profits. It is a clear conflict between the profit to the individual and cost to society. And the whole basis of my submission is that the council has a duty and obligation to prioritise the cost to society in this case. In particular, as I say in my submission, the two things I think which have clearly been shown to be most effective is to reduce the availability of alcohol, not trying to ban it, but to make it less available. Following on, I would suggest, as I said in my submission, 10 in the morning to 2100 hours for off licences should be more than adequate. And on licence, I mean, I really can't see why anyone would want to start drinking before breakfast, but I'm sure there are. But I suggested 9 o'clock for all classes apart from hotels, where the use of minibars makes that impractical. Probably can't really add anything to that. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Pete. Thanks for the thought you've put into this. Any questions from councillors? Doesn't look like it.
Okay, can I just really just one comment of my own? I was really surprised that you said that there was very few people who noted the Auckland judgment in their submissions. I found that quite amazing.
Sorry, I was actually noting that several people had mentioned the Auckland findings, not that nobody had, yeah.
Pete, could you, if you have a copy of that, there were several references there you made that weren't in your submission, but might be useful to us in case any questions arise. If you could leave that piece of paper behind, that would be great.
Yeah, that was just my scribble, but I'm happy to have them sent to you.
Thank you very much. All right. Thanks for taking the time, Pete, to give us your views.
Thank you.
All right. Without any sign of Mr. Pratap, that's the last of our submitters. So I thank all of them for joining us and helping us with their views. I'm now going to adjourn the hearing, and the hearing panel members will deliberate in private.